Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today I'm going to be working on a Tsunami Trophy Series 4000 spinning reel. I will show you basic maintenance to the reel, how to disassemble, how to inspect the parts, how to do lubrication on the reel, and how to reassemble that reel again. This is a nice high quality reel. It's got a 9 ball bearing structure. This is a 4000 size, which is an intermediate size. It's capable of handling deep lakes, inshore ocean, and generally it's a very versatile reel. And I find that the Tsunami series, for some reason, their 4000 markings and 6000s and so on seem to be bigger than the classic 40 series reels. But upon inspection, they are very nice, very smooth operating reels. Some of the marks are the high qualities, the number of bearings, the rosewood handle, the long cast aluminum spool, and so on. So let's get started with this one, and I'll take it apart and show you how to perform those operations. This has a screw-through handle, so we're going to remove the button on the opposite side of the handle. And one of the tips I have in reel maintenance is to get a parts tray, and in this case it's as simple as the bottom of a milk jug, but keep all your small parts in there. That way when you reassemble, you know where that reel is going to be. This is a through handle, as I mentioned. It has a stud that goes through the main gear. This also has an operating fold feature to it. And that seems a little tight right now, so I'm going to start by lubricating that. And I use a WD-40 for moving parts like this, and just a little squirt there, and then again I'll put that into my parts bin. Next I'm going to remove the spool. Not sure what lies underneath these. I'm going to set this aside. I'll show you later how to do the drags to that. And then we'll take off the side case. Now, in this case, there's two ways that the side pieces are put on. Some of these go through, and you have to remove the bail carrier in order to get to it, and some of these sit up against the bottom plate. In this case, this one's sitting up against the bottom plate. This is held on by 4 screws. You can't see the 4th because it's under the bump guard and a bump guard below. So let's take that off first and access the gearing. First piece off would be the bump guard. Again, this is a great reason why you use a parts tray, because there are a lot of small parts there. And then there are 3 Phillips head screws underneath that. I said 4 before. I guessed wrong. Okay, so those come off. Now you could use a battery-powered screwdriver for this if you wanted to. Or if you don't have the dexterity or the hand strength, I would recommend it. In my case, I just kind of like working with the tools. Matter of preference. Okay, that should be it. Okay, we take it apart and you look at the assembly. And underneath, this one's got some dried lubricant in it. I can see already that that's probably one of the reasons why I have some rough operation. Here's one of the bearings. There's another bearing on the opposite side, and if you turn it, you can see this one may be over lubed, and that's as much a problem as being under lubed. So I have the 3 plate screws in there. I'm going to put that side plate assembly inside. Next I'm going to do is remove the spool carrier, the main shaft. That has 1 small screw. Again, put that in the parts bucket, and then that pulls out from the top once you remove that. The next piece then would be to remove that carrier, and that carrier has an awful lot of lubrication on it. As I mentioned, that might be getting in the way of this function. When you do that, then you can remove the main gear. Without removing that shaft, this main gear, which has an indentation on it, where the shaft sits, would not be able to be pulled out. First thing I want to do when I remove the main gear is inspect it. This one's got a lot of lubrication and it's dried on it, so I use just a little screwdriver and I work to take that out. So this doesn't surprise me. I got this reel from a distributor. It's an older older version of the reel, and it's probably been sitting in his warehouse for some time now. So it was probably a warm warehouse, and it just over time grease does coagulate and does just kind of knot up and become a detriment rather than an aid in reel operations. So we're going to take that stuff off. As you can see, I'm cleaning it up pretty good, and I use a paper towel for the grease, and then I'll wipe it down with that. Now, another good tool to have in your cleaning operations is a Q-tip. That helps you get into some of the tougher spaces, and it also has that adhering function and feature to it. Okay, so we took that off, and then as I mentioned before, one of the bearings that sits on there is on this side. So to properly lubricate this, the bearings, I use a bearing oil or a reel grease. In this case, I use Real-X as the product that I choose. It's designed for fishing reels. It has a good lubricating quality, and I'll just do a liberal dose there, and in a moment I'll do the other bearing on the other side. But there's a bearing that rides under this, and this gear's got a lot of lubricant that's kind of dried up on it. So I'm going to take that off. You'll see that there should be a bearing underneath this one. That's a little unusual. Most of them just ride on a peg, but in this case I'm going to leave that part right there and pull this carrier gear. In this case, because it's so full of lube, I'm going to take it out and clean it, and I'll be able to show you the bearing underneath. So there's your bearing underneath. So that's a high quality reel when you've got a bearing on that spool gear. So again, I'm going to use my cotton swab to get that excess out of there. And one of the reasons why an excess lubrication is a problem is that if you get sand or you get something in there, it really does accumulate in that excess lube and causes even bigger problems. So now I got two bearings exposed here. I got the alternate side plate bearing and this carrier bearing here. And again, I'm going to use Real-X on that. There's plenty of oils out there, including 3-in-1, which will do a fine job. There's machine oils. There's other manufacturers' oils. Any of those will work well. I just happen to use Real-X. It's a fairly common available product from any tackle store or online. Okay, so I'm going to put that back on now, and that little screw that I set off to the side there, that goes back in. Again, that's a Phillips head, sits on top of the bearing, and that's the carrier assembly. So I like to wear these gloves to keep the lubricants and chemicals off of my one hand. If you like, you can wear it on two, but I find that it's a problem with dexterity in terms of working with some of these smaller parts. So then we're going to clean that excess off of the spool transition piece here. I'm going to do a light lubrication on this, and I use a general reel grease. In this case, it's Penn's reel grease. I find that that's a good product as well. There are others out there, and certainly this isn't the only one on the market that does a good job. Okay, and then a little bit on that riding assembly there, and that's back the way it should be. The next piece I look for here is the spool and the spool bearing. There seems to be some accumulated dried up grease on this as well, so I'm going to try and clean that up. Again, I'll use the cotton swabs to go ahead and do that. And now I'm going to pull this spool assembly, or the bail carrier, off, because there's another bearing under there, and I want to make sure that gets lubricated as well. So there's a set screw that holds that in place. And again, I got the parts tray, but I expect to put this right back on, so I'm just going to leave that off to the side. And then it's just a matter of finding the right wrench that holds the this particular nut here. There we go. And some of these nuts are put on clockwise and some of these are put on counterclockwise. There's a theory each. Normally you would go righty-tighty. In this case, right turning takes it off. And that's because that's the rotation of the spool during reeling. So it serves that as it's rotating that way, it's not working against it. All right, so I took the main shaft off, and this is where you see the bearing underneath. We have a bearing, and then we have an anti-reverse bearing under that. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to lube the main bearing, which is sitting right on the top. And again, a nice coating, but don't over lube. As we saw underneath here, number one problem seems to be no lubrication. Number two problem seems to be too much. And then I always like to put a little bit of oil from the opposite side in that bearing structure. And then I'll put, finally on this piece before we close it up, some real grease on the pinion gear. Okay, so with that in place then, I'm going to reverse this. I can close this up by reversing the steps. So the first thing we do is we take the bell carrier, we put that back on. Remember, we took this off in the reverse mode clockwise, so now we're actually going to tighten counterclockwise, which again is not the normal way that nuts run. Just happens to be on this one, and on a lot of fishing reels I notice that they do that. So don't go crazy if you're doing it in the normal lefty-loosey and you find out it's not moving anywhere. Try to back it up if you can't see the threads. Okay, so that one's back on. Tighten that down. And once I get it tightened down, if I do too much, I like to spin it. Oh, that spins nice. That's what I like to do. I like to just check to make sure that I've got the operation properly and that I didn't do anything to snag it up, miss a part or whatever. And then I take that set screw back into the stop hole there and put that back in play. As many of you who watch my videos know, I have a little bit of trouble with some of these small parts, but patience does play out, and I enjoy doing this, so I don't get terribly frustrated when I have trouble getting those parts in place. I guess there's a lesson there somewhere. I'm not sure what it is. Okay, so then we'll just tighten that down. Oops. There we go. All right, and then we're ready to put the bottom assembly together. The bottom assembly, remember, we've lubed this up now. So we reversed the process. We had to take the main shaft out in order to get the gear out, so we reverse with that. I'm going to put a little bit of oil, I'm sorry, a little bit of lube on the shaft, even though we've lubed the bearings already. I'm going to put a little bit of lube on the teeth that drive the spool shaft assembly, and just a little bit of lube, and this was over lubed on the teeth back here, just to get it going. It'll work its way in over time and usage. Okay, so that goes back in place. Now we take the spool shaft that comes back through the hole and goes down into the carrier, and you need to align the hole in the carrier with the hole in the shaft. And then there's the small screw that we put in the parts tray. That goes to set this. Again, I have some trouble with these little parts. Alright, and then we'll go ahead and tighten that up. Quick check to make sure that it works and it's working exactly the way it should be working. Actually, it's nice and smooth reel there. And then we're going to go put the side plate back on. And again, I left the plate screws in there. If you take them out, they're They're the Phillips head longer screws. They just sit in. Make sure you don't have trouble. If you feel something jamming when you're putting that side plate in, you've missed something along the way, and back it off. Don't try and force a side plate on, because it's just going to cause the reel to bind. These were designed as holders, but they're not designed as a to crunch on there. Okay, and then we're going to put that bump guard back on. And then the bump guard has the one more screw, which goes in the bottom. Again, this is a high quality reel. A lot of the bearings in that you saw, you won't find in the lower valued reels. Okay, then the handle goes back on, and the side place handles goes back on as well, and not on the other side. That'll drive the reel. And then we'll just test again. Okay. And now I noticed that the WD-40 has worked on that handle release, and we're good in terms of the handle release as well. Okay, last thing I want to show you on that rebuild then is the drag system. I want to go in and make sure that the drags work. In this case, this has an interesting approach. Many of the drags have a little retainer clip which you pull out. In this case, we've got a top of the spool which is holding the drags in place, and it's held in by 3 Phillips head screws. So I'm going to take those out, and I'm going to try and take this cap off without taking the screws out, because of the way that I have problems with small screws. You can take them out, put them in a parts tray, and so on. But in this case, if I don't have them all out. Okay, that should just lift out. Does. Set that down, and then here's your drags. Your drags should be a 7 drag system or close to it. These are Teflon drags, so they do not require lubrication. Actually, if you lubricate a Teflon drag, it tends to be a problem. So here's your bottom of your drag carrier. Your assembly goes this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a 6 drag system. Teflon drag, keyed drag, color drag, ear drag. There's 2 indentations in the spool. The ear drag goes and sits in both. Teflon drag, and then the second of the keyed drags. And then I'm going to just pick this up, and if I get this right, we should get it right, because underneath it should have the indentations that hold it there. Reset the Phillips head screws. If you needed to replace the drags, it's as simple as that. I used the originals because they're in good condition, but if you needed to replace your drags, same procedure. Okay, and then finally, this is going to sit back on the reel. The drag knob goes on. And this reel's ready to go fishing again. So it's quite as simple as that in terms of how to maintain a basic reel. Check for broken parts, replace as needed, and that's a smooth operator. The last piece I would look at, there are a bearing here for the line bearing, so it doesn't hurt to put a little bit of oil on that, on the line guide, and then I also just tend to put a little dab of oil on each side of the bale carrier. So that's it. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope it encourages you to perform basic maintenance on your reels and to keep them fishing in the long term. I appreciate you watching the video. If you're interested in seeing videos on other reels that I perform maintenance on, they're part of my collection. Thank you again. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.